Hello Infinity recap here. The film opens on the school transport. As it drives along, it passes some street kill in the city. One of the understudies, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ross Lynch, notification and gazes at it eagerly. In another column, John Durf Backdurf, Alex Wolf, is attempting to draw the transport driver, yet isn't happy with how it ended up. On the walkway, a man runs, grabbing Dahmer's eye. He gets up and remains at the rear of the transport and watches the jogger through the window. The transport driver sees him and advises him to put down. Dahmer does as such, hesitantly. Getting back, Dahmer sees his mom, Joyce Ann Hetch, who is conversing with an inside decorator that is evidently going to retry their home. The man has cerebral paralysis and Dahmer starts to impersonate him. Joyce advises him to stop it. Dahmer is strolling not too far off with a sack in his grasp when two children on bicycles come dependent upon him and ask what he has. Dahmer lets them know it is the body of a dead feline and shows them. They ask how he will manage it, and Dahmer answers he will disintegrate it in corrosive. They don't trust him, so he says he will show them. In a shed on his family's property, we see that Dahmer has a lot of dead creatures in containers. He puts the feline in the container and makes sense of to the young men that his dad is a physicist, however the corrosive he has is really powerless, so it will require about a month to completely break up it. One of the young men asks him for what valid reason he does this. I like bones. They interest me, Dahmer says. The other kid calls horse crap on Dahmer's cases, saying that the containers presumably have only sloppy water in them. Dahmer then takes one of his containers outside and crushes it on the ground, showering corrosive and broke up creature on the ground. The young men gag and escape, calling Dahmer an oddity. Dahmer eats with his mom, his dad Lionel, Dallas Roberts, and his more youthful sibling David, Liam Coeth. The supper is wild-eyed, with everybody talking over one another. Dahmer attempts to take a chicken leg, however is told to give it to his sibling, regardless of his inclination for dim meat. Dahmer inquires as to whether he could get more grounded corrosive to utilize, and his dad says he'll see what he can do. His folks get some information about tennis, and Dahmer lets him know he let them know that finished 7 days prior, yet that he is still in walking band. David sees that the chicken meat is red and hence not cooked through, and his dad affirms it. Joyce is exactly upset, thinking they are dismissing her cooking and sets some hard boundaries. New house rule. We eat our missteps, Joyce says, and the supper proceeds. In class the next day, John makes a scene in science class and is compelled to sit with Dahmer. Dahmer eyes a fetal pig in a container. At lunch, Dahmer addresses one of his main companions about a show of a band the two of them like. A senior makes a declaration for prom, while Dahmer's companion is gone after by a harasser. At home, Dahmer watches his folks battle. His mom claims she is returning to work, while his dad says she just escaped a psychological emergency clinic and is in no condition to do as such. David additionally witnesses this and Dahmer solaces him, saying their folks simply battle here and there. We see Dahmer at band practice. A short time later, Dahmer leaves and sees his companion, just for two domineering jerks to go after him. The companion shouts to Dahmer, expecting to avoid consideration, yet Dahmer simply leaves, not having any desire to get injured himself. Lionel gets back and asks David where everybody is. David lets his dad know that he doesn't have the foggiest idea. Lionel hauls a garbage bin to the shed and barges in while Dahmer is working. He begins snatching the containers and tossing them into the waste, in spite of his child's fights. Lionel lets his child know that nothing more will be tolerated and that he should be more friendly and more dynamic in his life. Lionel lets him know he plans to obliterate the shed forever. As he leaves, Dahmer pouts. At school, Dahmer is drawn closer by Lloyd Figg, Miles Robbins, the school's street pharmacist. He attempts to sell Dahmer some weed. Dahmer appears to be available to it and searches his pockets and takes out a pack. Figg gets some information about it, and Dahmer says he gathers street kill, yet is attempting to stop. Figg says he can assist him with that assuming he needs, and says he'll see him around. Lionel satisfies his commitment and destroys the shed. Dahmer digs through the destruction and recuperates a couple of creature bones. Moving the bones around his hand, Dahmer passes on by the street and watches the jogger run by, watching him eagerly. In his room, Dahmer is gone up against by his dad, who apologizes for his rash way of behaving, including the shed. Lionel makes sense of that he sees a great deal of himself in his child, and it is the parts he could do without, like his contemplation. He simply maintains that his child should be more friendly, to have more from life than he. Lionel gives his child a gift, a few loads so he can work out and perhaps stand out. As his dad leaves, Dahmer sneers and pushes the loads under his bed. However, we next see him doing reps, getting more grounded. Dahmer is in the forest, making a stone snare with a stick, rope, and trap. He trusts that a squirrel will go under and pulls the rope, pounding it. Time has elapsed. It is presently the start of Jeffrey Dahmer's senior year of secondary school. It is 1978. In history class, Dahmer is inquired as to why history is significant. He says he doesn't have any idea. The instructor squeezes him, and Dahmer keeps on saying he doesn't have the foggiest idea, ultimately making up a voice to say he doesn't have the foggiest idea, as though he was intellectually hindered, getting a concise chuckle from the class. In the hall, tries out for a play are being finished. Dahmer is evidently expected to sing. Dahmer leaves, quitting totally. Acknowledging he is seen when he spazzes out, Dahmer starts to do it in the lobby to definitely stand out enough to be noticed. He stands out of everybody in the corridor, basically until the ringer rings. During his most recent episode of Carrying On, John and his companions, Neil, Tommy Nelson, and Mike, Harrison Holzer, consider Dahmer and think that he is amusing. John chooses to welcome Dahmer to his companions' table. They let him know they think his little explosions are interesting, and they need to make a Dahmer-energetic group of followers. Dahmer grins, delighted to stand out, and maybe even companions. In the library, Dahmer starts to make commotions. An instructor hears it and continues to fault different understudies for the unsettling influence, never thinking Dahmer. Afterward, the young men join Dahmer, spazzing out in the passage. At home, Dahmer attempts to let his mom know that he has companions coming over. All things considered, he sees Joyce rifling through her sack for cigarettes and pills in a hyper state. Dahmer inquires as to why she is doing that and that he thought she quit taking those pills. He inquires as to whether she is returning to the specialist, yet she laughs at that, saying he just guided her, very much like Dahmer is doing to her at the present time. In his room, Dahmer starts to hyperventilate. It is gradually going to pieces to go nuts that his loved ones. At the point when John and Neil show up, he closes the entryway in case his mom is resting and can't be upset. At the point when Neil inquires as to whether Liz, a former student of their secondary school, actually lives on Dahmer's road, they go there. Neil thumps on her entryway and claims to be a journalist for the school paper. He then asks her how it feels to know the greatest long periods of her life are behind her. Offended, the young lady pummels the entryway right in front of him. John separates in giggling. In class, John is drawing when a young lady asks him, "Is Dahmer your dream?" John doesn't have the foggiest idea how to answer. The young lady says perhaps John could draw her at some point, and he concurs. Dahmer says he could draw the young lady and advises her to rest on the ground, and he makes a chalk frame around her to the chuckles of the class. John, Mike and Dahmer go fishing. That's what John noticed, assuming they end up finding anything. They need to toss it back given its little size. Dahmer gets a fish, so John gives him a blade to get it off the line and back into the water. All things being equal, Dahmer wounds the fish a few times, cutting it open. A stunned John inquires as to why he did that. I simply needed to see what its internal parts resembled, Dahmer answers. John, however frightened, simply advises Dahmer to dispose of it. Later at school, John, Neil, and Mike are attempting to consider an incredible trick for the yearbook as Neil takes the photographs utilized. Dahmer makes some noise and says he has a thought that he ought to be put in each club photograph, regardless of the reality he is in, not even one of them. John and the mindless conformity, it is really smart. Dahmer is put in each photograph. While everybody grins, he has a level, droning look all over. John comes more than one day to spend time with Dahmer. Tragically, Lionel and Joyce are battling and take no regard that their child has a companion over. Joyce even erroneously calls John by an alternate name. Dahmer is humiliated by his parents' way of behaving, and John rapidly leaves. Dahmer keeps on following the jogger that shows to his family's property. John works at a general store. One day Dahmer comes in with Mike and does his spaz schedule, making clamor, tossing food and so forth, in the long run shoplifting a thing when the chief attempts to stand up to him. John later pulls the gathering to the side, saying he nearly got terminated because of Dahmer's tricks and notes that can never again do Dahmer's schedules openly. Dahmer concurs. As they are going to leave, Dahmer's jogger drives in. It turns out he is Dr. Matthews, Vincent Carthieser, a nearby specialist who knows the guardians of a few of the young men as patients. Dahmer notes Dr. Matthews runs by his home each Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. John laughs at Dahmer's consideration regarding that detail. Dahmer returns home to see his folks battling once more. His mom has purchased a vehicle they can't manage without his dad's assent. His father attempts to converse with him, yet makes a terrible display of it and leaves. Dahmer sees his father left a jug of alcohol and takes it. He starts to lavishly drink. Afterward, Mike and John run into Dahmer, who lets them know he quit band. Fig comes dependent upon them and shows them a blade his dad had. John cautions Dahmer to avoid Fig. Dahmer overlooks him and goes out into the timberland one day with Fig. Fig has a pistol he has taken from his dad. He fires a round at a squirrel. Then, at that point, John shows Dahmer new drawings of him. Dahmer grins at them. End the class outing to DC. Dahmer is brought together with the main individual of color of their group. Dahmer starts to pose inquiries about how various they might be inside, then, at that point, stops when he understands he is getting excessively bizarre. Regardless of this, Dahmer can get John, Mike, and Neil, and a couple of others into a rare chance the following day. Professing to be school journalists from their secondary school paper, Dahmer orchestrates a gathering with the helper to the VP. Incredibly, the gathering can encounter the VP getting a couple of moments to chat with him. The VP asks the gathering what they need to study after secondary school. At the point when he gets to Dahmer, he answers, science. At the point when he returns home from the excursion, Lionel is there to get him. Lionel lets his child know that he moved out while he was gone, and it was better for everybody. It'll be agreeable, he expresses, alluding to his possible separation from Joyce. Joyce addresses Dahmer inquiring as to whether he needs to discuss what's going on. He says no. Dahmer goes to see Dr. Matthews, professing to have a virus. Dr. Matthews gives him a total physical and says he is fine. The gathering is tense, however, given Dahmer's unusual fixation on him. Afterward, Dahmer strokes off to the memory of being moved by Dr. Matthews. Dahmer is seen hitting a tree with a huge stick, falling to pieces from the different issues in his day-to-day existence. Dahmer spends time with the gathering, however they are to a great extent disregarding him. At the point when the conversation goes to closest companions, Dahmer shouts out, noticing, I wish I had a closest companion. John is stunned, failing to remember Dahmer was even there. The following day at school, Neil starts to scrutinize their fellowship with Dahmer, contemplating whether they are mistreating him and simply involving him for their own entertainment. John excuses those worries, saying they are just having some good times and Dahmer wouldn't tolerate it on the off chance that he wasn't having living it up. Dahmer keeps on gorging drink. The yearbook photographs come in and Neil and John giggle at Dahmer being in each one. In any case, an educator sees him and in a real sense utilizes a Sharpie marker to smear him out of the photographs. Dahmer stands by listening to his mom contend with her separation attorney on how he is taking care of her case. On the off chance that he gets the house, I get Dave, Joyce shouts. Dahmer maneuvers a canine into the forest and takes out a blade, planning to kill it. He doesn't proceed with it and eventually pursues the canine away. Dahmer and his sibling are driven by their mom to meet with their dad. Be that as it may, John and Mike and Neil choose to do one last spaz occurrence with Dahmer as a way to go out with style. They get a lot of individuals to contribute to pay Dahmer to make it happen and a colleague to film it. Dahmer consents to make it happen. En route to the shopping center, he rapidly downs a few brews, amazing and concerning John. At the shopping center, Dahmer is given some more cash and as he is recorded, starts to carry on. He makes clearly commotions, excoriates his body around in strange bendings, follows clients, and tosses plates of food inside a cafe. The gathering chuckles at the jokes, however the camera follows intently on Dahmer as we find in front of him that he gradually slows down, lost in his own considerations. He later rejoins the gathering who let him know he made an incredible execution. Dahmer holds up external the street one day with a bat, willfully sitting tight for Dr. Matthews, who doesn't run by. In a barren fury, Dahmer strikes his bat against a tree until it breaks in two. Two children are strolling in the woods when they track down a killed canine. The secondary school hums with gossip on who got it done. Prom is drawing nearer. John, Mike, and Neil are talking about it, and one of them says nobody would go with Dahmer. Dahmer hears them say that. He then, at that point, continues to persuade a first-year recruit young lady, Bridget, to go with him. She says okay, relying on the prerequisite that he doesn't act unusual in any capacity. He vows to behave as well as possible. Dahmer goes to prom with Bridget. Neil sees him and draws him out into the open, stunning the threesome, which was Dahmer's expectation from the start. Dahmer attempts to be a man of his word and get Bridget a punch to drink. Neil comes dependent upon him and apologizes to him for how they treated him. Dahmer takes the conciliatory sentiment unemotionally. Dahmer ultimately requests that Bridget dance. On the dance floor, he sees John and offers congrats. At the point when John asks what for, Dahmer answers that they made it, importance graduating secondary school. John takes it gracelessly. Dahmer lets Bridget know that he needs to utilize the washroom. All things considered, he discards her and goes to get cheap food and eats it in his vehicle, alone. The last day of school closes. While everybody is amped up for graduating and for the future, Dahmer leaves the school deadpan. At home, he sees his sibling getting together the vehicle. David and Joyce will see his grandma, despite the fact that they will miss his graduation. Joyce claims it will be okay since his dad will be there and they can't be in a similar room together. Dahmer heads inside and pushes over some furniture prior to tumbling to the ground and wailing. Dahmer graduates. His dad lets him know he is pleased with him and gives him a vehicle for a graduation present. John goes to get his last check from the general store. Coming back, he sees Dahmer heading back home alone. He offers him a ride, which Dahmer acknowledges. John sees his horrendous hands. Dahmer claims it is paint. John isn't calm yet, attempts to keep the discussion ordinary, getting some information about school. Dahmer says he will be going to Ohio State, while John will be taking workmanship classes in Pittsburgh. At the point when they get to his home, Dahmer inquires as to whether he needs to hang out, yet John says he needs to return home. He then, at that point, remarks on their experience with Dahmer, saying they were simply having some good times. Dahmer appears to concur, yet at the same time presses for one brew. One lager, and everything is excused, Dahmer says. John concurs, however is panicked that every one of the lights in the house are out and that Dahmer's dad isn't home. As he strolls in, Dahmer strolls up genuine near John, crawling him out. John claims he needs to return home and rapidly moves to his vehicle. Behind him, Dahmer strolls with a bat, meaning to strike him, however John gets into his vehicle rapidly. As the motor starts, Dahmer rapidly conceals the bat and watches John drive off, John not understanding that he was so near a savage end. Dahmer awakens loomed over from an evening of drinking. He gets a six-pack of lager and goes off driving in his vehicle. Cruising all over, he sees a man catching a ride. Dahmer stops and inquires as to whether he was simply leaving a nearby show. The man says okay and says he was attempting to go to Akron. Dahmer offers him a brew and the valuable chance to party some more. The man says